welcome to another episode of the G.I. Joe New News Review. It is a special episode because we are going to be talking with my special guest today, the longtime artist of all things Marvel, DC, CrossGen, Malibu, you name it, he's done it. Wonderful gentleman name of Paul Pelletier. Hello, welcome to the show.
Hey, nice to be with you guys.
So you have really been in the industry for literally decades now. I'm trying to rack my brain as to when you started, but it's over 30 years, maybe 33 years.
Yeah, just about pretty much. I think I was able to quit my day job and do comics full time in '92. So it's been a while.
Um, I remember some of your earliest stuff going back because I was collecting comics in the early 80s and I was collecting all the ways till now, and I'm still collecting comics. But your career kind of got its start really around the launch of the Ultraverse, but you actually worked for Malibu Comics prior to that on X Mutants and Demon's Tales and a few other things. I want to shortly go over some of the credits, if you don't mind, of your career. I hope
Sure.
this doesn't make you a little astonished at all the work that you've done in this 33 years, because it's a lot.
Yep, it has been.
So let me shortly go through this real quick. So Malibu Comics, obviously, you did Demon's Tales, Adventure, X Mutants. You worked on Zen, Totem, Wayward Warrior, Chiron, from Alpha Productions and Hammer Productions, the same company that just changed the name, and you were the art director there. You worked
Well,
at,
the
if
quote
I'm
unquote,
mistaken, correct some of my stuff.
I'm just saying the quote unquote art director of Alpha Productions. I didn't know what I was doing, but it was a title.
Yeah, of course. We always want to lift ourselves up, don't we?
Sure.
With so then you went on over to DC Comics. You worked on Dark Stars, Outsiders, Green Lantern, Superboy, The Ravers, Flash, and Titans at the time. Then you did some Marvel work, Hulk, Silver Surfer. You did some independent stuff through Acclaim Comics, Megastar. And then, of course, you went over to one of my favorite companies, CrossGen Comics. And you worked at on Negation with Tony Bedard and Dave Mikas, and
Yep.
you did a whole bunch of stuff at CrossGen. I'll talk to you about that when we get to it. Then you went back to Marvel, and then you did a bunch of stuff at Marvel again: She-Hulk, Exiles, GIA, GLA,
Yep.
GLA, Hulk, FF, Nova, Guardians, Wolverine, Fearless, and Fear itself. Obviously, Guardians of the Galaxy, War of Kings, Nova, all that whole thing. And I'm going to talk to you about that as well.
Mhm.
Then you went back to DC when they relaunched the rebirth of the DC universe. You did some of my favorite titles. It seems like all the things you worked on are like things that I love. Uh, Aquaman, Cyborg, Titans, Batgirl, Green Lantern again. And then you've been doing some fill-in backup stories and so on and so forth in between there. And now you're working on one of my all-time favorite things. I'm wearing it on my sleeve, literally, G.I. Joe. And you have had a very long and illustrious career. Does it feel like 33 years have gone by to you? Because it's very
Uh,
strange to me. I don't feel that I'm 33 years older than I was in the 90s, but I am.
yeah, no, I fully understand that. Sometimes I can feel it. Sometimes, yeah, I look at a lot of the newer talent that's coming up in the industry. And it's like, man, there's so many talented artists that I always feel like I got to constantly have to prove myself. Like even coming on GI Joe, following Chris Mooneyham. Chris's work is unbelievable. So I mean, I always feel like I got to prove myself. I got to try and raise my game to try and keep up with some of these other people. So, um, But yeah, I think about it sometimes. I'll break it down where I've worked, what, 32, 33 years in the industry, usually about 10 issues a year, which usually it's at least 20 pages an issue. So we're talking like 7,000 pages. So it's kind of crazy when I think about it that way.
So I want to show a few of your works as we go along with this interview. And I hope you don't mind. I like to go down memory lane a little bit on some of these things. Like I said earlier, you have really worked on some of my favorite things in the comic industry. Uh, I guess I've been collecting comics for 40 years, but you have worked on like 30 years worth of my favorite things that I enjoy. Malibu Comics at the time, a lot of the things you've done have been revolutionary in the industry. You may not realize it at the time that you're doing it, or maybe you
Right.
do, and it doesn't affect you because you're in the trenches grinding away and stuff like that on the pages.
Mm-hmm.
But you've really worked on some revolutionary things, whether it be innovative new companies, innovative new approaches to relaunches, innovative reimaginings that have gone on to become huge films. If you look at all these things that you've affected in the industry, you have had a very productive career, not as an artist, but as someone that has had an impact on the industry as well.
I appreciate hearing that. I mean, I've never really thought of myself as being a big name in comics. Yeah, people know who I am, but I never hit that like superstar status. But yeah, I kind of look at myself as being like a Herb Trimpe or a Sal Buscema, guys that always produce solid work but never really quite hit that superstar status. So that's kind of how I look at my career so far.
Well, that's a good analogy, Sal Buscema, because I think he's still doing work. I don't know the last thing you worked on, but I think he's still doing stuff. I remember seeing him on some like backup stories in some of these Spider-Man things recently. So I think he's still working.
Yeah, and
So
so
that
the guys that are always putting out work and solid, really good comic book artwork, and but like I said, never quite hit. I mean, of course, Sal had his legendary run on the Hulk stuff, but still, not like superstar like a John Byrne or something like that. But yeah, that's kind of how I look at like my career so far. Is like, yeah, I've managed to stay busy for 30 plus years, so I must be doing something right.
Yeah, well, and the thing about it is you've improved, and I've spoken to George. I'm sure you've spoken to George because you guys did a lot of the same conventions. George said you're not doing your job if you're not improving on every single project you approach and get
Right.
onto. So, and I've noticed that with your project. So let me go back a little bit. Now, I don't have every single thing here that you've done in your career. It would be a long box full of stuff. I didn't have the space to bring a whole lot, but I'm going to show a few selections of your career over the years. And this is the first one, Demon's Tales,
Yep.
from an imprint of Malibu Comics, Adventure. Malibu Comics had about 7 or 8 different imprints. This is one of the imprints,
Yep.
Adventure. So is this? I don't think it's uh, your first professional work, but it's pretty close, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the first assignments I had that actually I got paid for what I did. Yeah, that resulted from before Demon's Tales. I was working with a bunch of guys here in Maine, Alpha Productions, doing the Totem, Wayward Warrior, all those other books, and we had driven down to Biloxi, Mississippi, to do a convention, and we met up with the Silverline guys. It was Roland Mann, Steve Butler, Mitch Bird, and Roland liked my work, and so we ended up doing the Demon's Tales thing together, and thankfully, because of that was an offshoot of Malibu, the Malibu people saw my work. They liked it enough that they wanted to hire me for actually first the first book I was doing for Malibu was Exiles, which was I don't think it's Ultraverse, but it was an offshoot of the whole Image universe because Marat Michaels did all the design work on the characters. So the first thing I did was Exiles, and then they hired me for X Mutants, even though X Mutants came out first. So,
Uh,
yep,
okay. I did not know about the Exiles because there's the Ultraverse version that Exiles.
yep.
So I'm not sure if that image
I did
series
issue.
ever
I did
came
issue
out.
one. Yeah, I did issue one of that.
Okay. Hmm. I'll have to research that because I was not aware of that series. Because
Mm-hmm.
I have every Image comic from the beginning, and I
Right.
don't think I have that Exiles. Either that or it's got a
Well,
different name.
it was a Malibu book, but it was
Oh,
designed by like Marat Michaels, who was working, I think, for Rob Liefeld and Extreme Studios at the time. Yep, the old X Mutants.
yep. So that
But
was
yeah,
your last issue.
that was the first book I was able to quit my day job and actually do comics full time. So
Um, and looking at that work and looking at stuff that you've done over the years, you definitely have improved your style, the detail in some of the later work that you've done, like in Cyborg and Aquaman. I'm looking at the two of those and I'm like, wait a minute, he is, you can see it. And I see it when you did cross-gen work. I saw it when you did Guardians of the Galaxy. The progression you did improve over those decades of those projects.
well, for me, the biggest learning experience I've had in my career was my what was it 2 or 3 years with CrossGen, because I look at the stuff I did in the '90s before CrossGen, and then what I did after CrossGen. That for me it was a huge leap. It was such a learning experience.
Let me see if I can find some of your cross-gen stuff. Oh, here it is. Okay. So these are some of the cross-gen books.
Hmm.
There's the Gation prequel,
That was such a fun book to work on.
uh, and then Negation. It's hard to see some of these. I'm sorry.
To this day at conventions, I still get a lot of CrossGen fans that come up and ask what was going to happen at the end of the Negation War, because unfortunately the company went belly up before we could finish the story. So,
There are pages. I know there are pages out there. I think it's scripts by Tony Bedard. I think he was the writer of this.
yep.
Uh,
Yeah,
and
I drew an entire issue and a half that never saw print. So
so that's the thing. I wish Marvel would get off their duff and try to get all that material and get you guys back together to at least finish it and have some sort of a conclusion. Right
right.
now, it's just up in the air. And obviously, they rebooted CrossGen and tried their own thing. But I don't, with all these cool projects coming back that were canceled, like the JLA Avengers was canceled, then was brought back, and then they redid it. CrossGen helped with that.
Mhm.
The Teen Titans Games graphic novel, that was something that was in limbo for decades, and they finally finished that. And then it seems like all these things involve George Perez, but the Starman, there's a graphic novel that was never put out in the 90s by James Robinson and Tony Harris. That's going to be coming out. So all these old projects that were kind of put in limbo, maybe there's a hope Marvel would. I doubt they'll see this, but you never know. Maybe they can try to get you guys back together and try to finish that. If there's already an issue and a half finished, there's no reason why. I don't know how many issues it was supposed to be. 5, 6.
I think it was trying to remember because I did covers. It was I think it was supposed to be 5 issues because two of them came out.
Right.
And yeah, so I did another issue and a half. It was either 5 or 6 issues. So. But in all honesty, if Marvel / Disney were going to do any of the cross-gen properties, I doubt Negation would be would be the one they'd focus on. They'd probably want like do something with Ruse or Mystic or one of the other properties that was a little more popular. Negation had its core kind of following, but it wasn't quite as popular as uh, I'm trying to remember. Sojourn was one of the more popular books. So
Well,
You know, who knows?
I was thinking more of a continuity situation because there's always these crisis on Infinite Earth things that these companies do. Even Malibu did it with Genesis.
Yep.
They tried to bring all these dispersed properties together to form Genesis, and Marvel has done that in the past. The Ultimate Universe is now part of the Marvel multiverse, and
Right.
we're in the multiverse saga at the moment of films. So I think negation, since it's jumping all well, maybe it's going from different world to different world,
Right.
meeting different people with powers, not necessarily parallel universes, but there's nothing with all these different reality characters that are in there. There's nothing uh, that can't be said to bring that to the Marvel universe, possibly, and that would be the only way you could do it is through the negation war. If you're going to do it, I don't see any other way to do it. But
Yep. Well, it scares me if to think that it's been over 20 years now. I
yeah,
think
it's
since
weird.
production, went belly up. So it's time flies.
It does fly because I remember seeing you at those conventions at those the booths where they had those huge circular booths and they had teams like every so many feet, like four people on, and you guys had to shift every 2 hours. It was a different team. And that was so organized. They did
Well,
such a good job with that.
early on though, we had when we first started doing those conventions, we had to sit at the booth for like 6 hours straight
Oh yeah.
until a lot of us were like, okay, let's have shifts so we can take some time off every once in a while.
Let's go back a little bit. Again, back to your DC roots. I didn't pull out Dark Stars, but I did pull out Outsiders.
Yep.
Um, and that was a really cool series. Outsiders, you did a really good job with that. Some of these properties, I don't know if you were familiar with at the time that you were working on these properties. Uh, Obviously, Batman and the Outsiders had ended a few years earlier,
Right.
but were this was a relaunch of the Outsiders with a whole bunch of new characters,
Mhm.
Eradicator and stuff like that. What was the pitch? Oh, I'm going to go work at DC. I'll do whatever. Or do you have some sort of say so as far as some of these jobs that you're working on?
No, well, the ironic thing was growing up when I was collecting comics, I was never a DC guy at all. So I wasn't really that familiar with a lot of the DC stuff. I had never sent any samples to DC. What happened was the inker I was working with on the early X Mutant stuff, Ken Branch, had sent samples of his inks to DC, and they were over my pencils. So he got a bunch of work, and then the editor asked him, and he said, "Who's this penciler you're working with?" And I got a call out of the blue from DC, and they offered me, well, originally was that fill-in issue of Dark Stars, and then I think it's the same editor contacted me about doing the relaunch of the Outsiders, and it's like, hey, yeah, it's a job, I'll take it. So, and I ended up, I think it was 21 issues in a row. I think I did of Outsiders.
Yeah, you did. I only showed a handful because like I said, I can't show
Oh, no.
everything that you've done. It'd be impossible to show all the work that you've
It's
done.
actually one of the longer runs I've had on a book. So
Yeah, I've been going through some of the stuff that I've had that I pulled out for you, and there's some really long runs, and that's the identification of an artist's skill is how long they can be on a book. Artists are the one of the most difficult people to try and get on a book for long periods of time. There's only a few that I'm aware of that have like astronomical runs, like Mark Bagley's got 100 issue runs on
right.
Spider-Man, Ultimate Spider-Man, this, that, and the other. There's not a lot of artists that can do that. But I'm looking at some of your runs. You've got good runs, 25 issue runs on a lot of these books
Mhm.
over the years. That has to be an arduous thing. I know a lot of artists, like when they bend over the table, it hurts their back over the years. When they get older, it bothers them and stuff. That had to be difficult on you and still must be difficult on you.
Well, I mean, it is in a way, but there's something to be said for being on a book for a while. Because for me, it takes me a good probably 3 or 4 issues to really get a good idea of the characters I'm drawing, the approach I should take with them. So if I'm constantly jumping around from like fill an issue to, like 2 issues here, 3 issues there, that can be kind of tough because the books could be completely different. And I got to learn a completely, a complete new cast of characters to draw. So when I get something like, I think Aquaman, I did 25 issues. I
Yeah.
got a really good pace going. I had a better feel how to draw Atlantis and the characters, different characters. So yeah, I mean, I try to be at least a page a day guy. So producing the artwork's never been a huge problem for me. Um, and I've managed to avoid the backaches and the carpal tunnel syndrome and all that kind of stuff. So I've been lucky so far.
Um, so let's go back to your upbringing and your education and stuff like that. Um, was comics something that you grew up with, and was that something that you aspired to do, or give us a little background as to how you got into the industry?
Let's see. Well, I mean, I always liked drawing, even when I was a little kid. It was mostly stuff like dinosaurs and Charlie Brown and that kind of stuff. It wasn't until fifth grade when my best friends introduced me to Marvel Comics, and specifically, it was the X-Men that really got me sucked in. Back when it was Dave Cockrum was drawing it, and then the John Byrne stuff, and John Byrne was like my first huge influence as far as artists and comics. But I was addicted to comic books, especially the Marvel stuff. By time let's see, I was a senior in high school. That's when I figured out, okay, this is what I want to do for a living. I mean, except for a couple years of art class in high school, everything else is self-taught. So it took me about 4 years after high school of working essentially for free, like for Alpha Productions and stuff. I did 15 or 16 issues worth of work with them, but we were all doing it for free. It was just a labor of love. We all enjoyed what we were doing. I had applied to the Kubert School right after high school, and I flew down for an interview with Joe Kubert, and I was accepted at the school, but I just couldn't afford it. So I did it the hard way. So instead of 4 years at school, I did 4 years of, day jobs and doing comic books for free at night, pretty much. Um,
The
and
hard
then,
way, the long way.
well, yeah, but you know what? There's something to be said for learning the skills, the craft by actually doing it. You know, of course, all my mistakes are printed, but still, I mean, you learn the hard way.
Well,
But yeah,
that's the thing.
so once I got hired by Malibu, I swore it's like because at that time I believe I was cutting shoe leather in a shoe factory,
Oh my
and
God.
so I was like, "Yep." As much as I like the people here at the shoe factory, this is not what I want to do for a living. So once I got my chance with Malibu, it's like, okay, I got to take this seriously. Don't screw it up, and hit the deadlines. Try to do good work, and like I said, I must be doing something right because 30 plus years later, I'm still doing it.
Well, you hit it exactly right on the head. Is you got your deadlines. That is from what I've heard over the decades of interviewing and talking to people like Joe Quesada and Joe and Den Dio and all these artists and writers. That's what they look for. That's what the editors want. They want people that are going to do the work, do a good job, and hit the deadlines. If you've got all those things, then you're going to be around for a while.
Well, that's how I landed the job with GI Joe. I had worked with Alex Antone, the editor at DC, and uh, as great an artist as Chris Mooneyham, of course, it takes him a little longer to produce the issues. He's doing all the inks, all the pencils himself. So Alex, contacted me about doing some fill-in issues to help help Chris out. And it's like, because Alex knew I was good with deadlines, and I work on a regular basis. I'm good at communication, so I think just having those work habits have really led to me getting projects constantly. So it's a good reputation to have.
That was one of the things at CrossGen that they kind of established this system for CrossGen where you had a fill-in artist every so many issues. I think it was like every 5 issues there was
Yeah.
a guy that would come in and fill in, and they put that in place. It made, from what I understand, talking to people, they said that was a saving grace to them at CrossGen because you guys were really cranking that stuff out, and you needed those months where you needed that fill-in, and the way that that system worked, it must have been like something that was a good training for you for the future after that.
Well, for me, actually, it was a nice break, just because I usually didn't need those fill-ins. I was one of the guys at Crossing, because there were guys like Jim Chung, who's an amazing artist, but he tended to be a little slower, so he definitely needed that fill-in issue. Whereas I was one of those guys that would just crank out the pages on a regular basis. So it was almost more of a luxury for me than anything else. It's like, oh wow, fill-in issue. It gives me even more time, so that's kind of nice.
So I spoke about it a little bit earlier about some of the revolutionary things that you have been a part of. Malibu is one of those revolutionary things. They were breaking the mold of the comic industry at the time. There were a lot of independents. Image Comics launched out of Malibu. A lot of other independents came around the same time: Valiant, Acclaim, Tops, Techno Comics, all tried to do different things. But a lot of that was the same things that Malibu had already done and established with their the Ultraverse and the Image titles and a lot of their Genesis titles. And they were doing things that were so unique, like making a movie of a comic before a comic comes out and having it go into the comic book. Uh, Doing flip comics, they had to have been the ones that made flip comic books famous because I don't think I ever saw a flip comic prior to Malibu.
Mhm.
Um, some of the gimmicks, like the bullet through the hole on the ferret issue, even
Yep.
though it wasn't, it didn't work out the exact way that I would have liked to have done it. They still did it.
Right.
And some of these things, I'm not even. They created a newspaper for their universe, Malibu
Press.
Press or whatever it was.
I think it was the Malibu Express, if I remember correctly.
What was
Express.
Malibu? It wasn't Malibu Sun. That was their magazine for the company. But
Oh,
they
that's
did
true.
Ultraverse Sun or Ultraverse something or other. It was a
Right.
magazine, kind
Yep.
of like a Daily Planet or Daily Bugle about that world. And I'm like, why hasn't DC and Marvel done this? That would be cool and have a backup story of Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen in the backup of the Daily Planet, you know? But they never did it. Ultraverse Malibu did it.
Well, I mean, that's one of the advantages sometimes for an independent company, is that they can take more chances to see what hits. I think the more corporate you become, the less chances you want to take, which is kind of sad, because you would think that if you had more money behind you, that you'd be willing to take more chances. But I've noticed, every time there's like a glut of comics, and then the industry crashes, it almost seems like when comics are doing gangbusters, everybody wants to do the same thing, and try and capture that money instead of using that money and try different things. It almost seems like the only time that companies want to try different things are when things are going really bad, which which doesn't make much sense to me. But yeah, Malibu was definitely at the forefront of trying all kinds of different ideas. Uh,
And
uh, Computer color. That's essentially why Marvel bought them out, was for their color.
no,
Computer.
that's a misnomer. A lot of people believe that, but it's actually not facts. It's one of those rumors that get put out into the ether that
Mhm.
has grown over the decades, but actually, in fact, it's not actually true.
Oh, I had heard that, but you know, I I think I remember a couple editors mentioning that when I was when I was first uh, leaving X Mutants. I think it was Hank Canals was writing the either editing the book or writing the book at the time. So, but all right, it's
So
part of the legend, I guess. So,
yeah, well, I can clarify that for you if you'd
okay,
like. Give you the truth of the matter. And I've talked to Dave Albrecht, Chris Ulm, Tom Mason,
yep,
and Roland Mann all about this, and they've all cleared it up. They were trying to, because it was very costly to do business. The comic industry is not a cheap business, and
no,
they had merged with the computer video game arm, Ultra Games or whatever it was, Malibu Games, I think it was.
okay,
And so they were having a difficulty paying their bills. So when they were shopping the company around, DC had said that they were interested in it. And so the reason why it didn't go to DC is Marvel didn't want their market share to grow, because Malibu had a very good market share at the
yep,
time. And so if they merged with DC, their market share would have been better than Marvel's.
right,
So in a negotiation tactic, it all comes down to money. So Marvel had more money, so they offered more money, and the powers that be at Malibu said, "All right, we're going to get more money. Let's go to Marvel." Had nothing to do with the coloring process, all about money.
okay, makes sense. And by the way, I still have my copy of X Mutants, the Sega Genesis video game cartridge. So
Oh yeah, that's rare.
when Malibu was putting out the video games at that time. So
Yep. So then you worked for another revolutionary company, CrossGen Comics.
yeah.
At the time, what was that?
No, I was going to say, yeah, CrossGen definitely was trying some revolutionary stuff. No doubt about that.
So I had several interviews with Mark Alessi during that whole period. I was fascinated by CrossGen because it wasn't superheroes. Unfortunately, they didn't like superheroes, and they killed off the world with the superheroes. But um, it was all about fantasy, sci-fi, genre things that went into all these different realms. Lord of the Rings, Star Trek, you name it. All this different genre stuff. Robin Hood, vampires, Sherlock Holmes, all
Oh
those
yeah,
different.
yeah, stuff like what Way of the Rat and The Path, which
Oh,
were more martial arts and like Shogun Warrior,
right.
that kind of stuff. So yeah.
So, but that was obvious. I thought that was revolutionary, innovative, out of the box thinking. Like, everybody's doing superheroes. Why can't we get some other genres out there? And Mark
Mhm.
Alessi obviously was a huge comic book fan at the
Yep.
time prior to this, and he sold his company for like $30 million or something like that. And he started a comic company in Oldsmar, Florida, and he did that. All of his titles were beautifully illustrated, beautifully written with some of the greatest writers of comics at the time: Barbara Kiesel, Ron Mars, um,
Chuck,
Brandon,
Chuck
uh,
Dixon.
Chuck Dixon,
Yep. Mark
Tony
Wade was
Bedard,
there for a while. So yeah.
Mark Wade.
Yeah.
And so I think that was something that even the industry, the people in the industry wanted something different. So all these guys, artists, writers alike, kind of came to CrossGen. They obviously did some headhunting. They got a few people from DC and stuff, but most of these guys, I think, had to have said, "This is different, fresh, innovative." What was your take on CrossGen? Because you came a few years into it.
Yeah, I was part of the second wave of the cross gen books. Um, I mean, honestly, I think when they got guys like Ron Mars and Mark Wade and Barbara to be writers there, they were smart in that when they were going after artists, they were getting people that were really talented but kind of overlooked by the Marvels and DCs at the time. Guys like the Steve Eptings and Greg Lands and Scott Eaton, all these guys who were producing really good work but just kind of flew under the radar with Marvel and DC. So, and I kind of throw myself in that situation too. Um, I look at some of the guys, or Butch Guice and Bart Sears. I mean, we had some insanely talented people that worked at CrossGen. Um, I don't know. At that time when they first approached me, I was doing Titans at DC. I really wasn't happy with what I was doing. I didn't even want to see my books on the shelves at that time. So I was kind of look in need of something that was different, and that offer came at a perfect time and really helped reinvigorate my love for drawing comics at that time. So it came perfect timing for me.
And your series, there was so many different creatures and types of people, and the worlds that you were on, like spaceships and alien planets and cosmic beings and stuff. And obviously you did Green Lantern, but you really didn't reach that kind of storytelling in Green Lantern that you did in Negation, and then the Mark of Sharon and Negation War.
Right.
Did you feel that when you were working on those books, that this was something that hasn't been done, or different, at least? Because I know Marvel obviously did the Infinity Gauntlet, but it wasn't quite the same thing.
Right. Well, it was a challenge for me because even though I've done a lot of sci-fi books and comics, I don't feel it comes to me naturally. So it takes a lot out of me. But the fun thing with Negation was it's one of the books at CrossGen that Mark Alessi really, he didn't care about it. So we just could, me and Tony Bedard, Dave Micus, and the colorist James Rochelle, we would just sit down and try to come up with just the goofiest, comics that we enjoy, just goofy, weird, do whatever we can, have a bunch of like, oh crap moments in the book. So, I mean, I think we benefited by the fact that Mark Alessi is like, nah, his focus was on Scion and Sojourn and like the initial books that he helped create. So with Negation, he didn't care quite as much. So we just did what we wanted, and I think that's why the book was as fun as it was. So we just said, hey, let's see how far we can push the envelope within the confines of the CrossGen universe, and
Well,
that's what was fun.
it kind of turned out that Negation was the glue of the CrossGen universe, on,
Yeah, in a
from
weird
my
way.
perspective, because it touched all the titles in a way, and it connected all the titles
Hmm.
in a way that you didn't see when you started, obviously, because there were different people from different worlds in the first issue and the
Yep.
first couple of story arcs. You grew and got added other characters. But yeah, without that series, you have these different planets. Yeah, and they're fine, they're beautiful, and they're wonderfully drawn and illustrated and written fantasy stories, but it's not a universe. You made it a universe.
Right. Well, you know what the funny thing with Negation too was initially when I first showed up at CrossGen, Negation was going to be written by Mark Waid. I was going to draw it. Mike Perkins was going to ink me, and Laura Martin was going to color. And then they got Butch Geist got hired, and that's when they came up with the ruse idea. So the entire Negation team, except for me, went over to Ruse, and they got Tony Bedard and Dave Micus and James Rochelle, and we ended up doing the Negation stuff instead. But yeah, I mean, I think that's why the Negation War happened, is because we could fuse all the different worlds of CrossGen together. Like you said, the glue that kind of held everything together, and I think that's why towards the end, the only logical way to have a cross company, uh, big event would be through Negation. So, it makes sense what you said. In a weird way, it was kind of the glue.
And that's interesting that you say that it was kind of a afterthought. Some of the greatest things that have happened in the comic industry, in my memory, are things that are afterthought. Like you add an artist on to be a fill-in artist, and they turn out to be a phenomenal artist and writer. Frank Miller on Daredevil, that was a fill-in artist, but look at Frank Miller today. You can't even take him away from
Well, I
Daredevil.
mean,
That's synonymous.
when I joined CrossGen, Steve McNiven was, he was
Oh,
just a brand new guy who never really did comics before, and he just exploded after CrossGen. So I mean, yeah, you never know what's going to
he was an
happen.
art teacher right there in Tampa, and he wasn't. He wanted to be a comic artist too, just like all you guys, but he had
Mhm.
to do what paid the bills, and sometimes that happens.
Or another good example is me doing the first 7 issues of Guardians of the Galaxy. When I was drawing that book, none of us had any idea that it was going to be turned into a movie and become a huge hit. So, because when I would tell friends of mine who didn't read comics, they were asking me what I was working on, I'd say Guardians of the Galaxy, and they'd be like, "What? What's that?" Fast forward another 4 or 5 years, and everybody knew who Guardians of the Galaxy was. So that came completely out of left field.
That's another one of those projects. I was an absolute Guardians fanatic when Jim Valentino and Steve Montano were doing
Mhm.
their series, and then Kevin West and I can't remember who the writer at the time was, but they were doing that series, and I was like, oh my god, they're gonna bring the Guardians back! I can't wait. And then reading it in the the crossovers. I'm now blanking on the
But
names of the
yeah,
crossovers. What was
trying
that?
to remember, was that during the whole Annihilation thing? Or,
Annihilation,
yeah,
yes. Annihilation 1 and 2. Keith Giffen brings all these dispersed characters that nobody cares about. Rocket Raccoon, Groot,
yep,
Star-Lord, Gamora, all these characters into this universe for a crossover, and then they form the Guardians. It's like, yeah, nobody cared about those characters at the
nope,
time,
nope,
but look at them now. Now everybody knows who that iteration of the Guardians of the Galaxy was.
right.
And I think you guys did a phenomenal job. And it's one of the best Guardians runs in the history of Guardians of the Galaxy, in my opinion. There have been others after, but the Jim Valentino run, your run, maybe a little bit of I can't think of his name. I'm having a hard time with names all of a sudden. But afterwards, the guy that did Ultimate Spider-Man, who the hell is he? Um,
Oh, it's not Bendis, was it?
yes,
Yeah, okay,
Brian Michael Bendis. I couldn't remember. He had a nice run that included some X-Men stuff with that Guardians that was very different and
right.
interesting. So, but that goes to show another revolutionary thing that went into film that I doubt you'll get any residuals of those films or anything like that,
No,
or the animated series for that matter.
nope, nope. I
You
think
didn't create any of that, right?
the only thing I got out of it pretty much was a couple of invites to the premieres. But that
Well,
was pretty much it. Yeah, because I didn't create the characters. So,
right.
but still, it's kind of cool to have that on my resume. Even though it was like before the movies came out, but essentially that I think the Giffen was it Timothy Green, I think, did the artwork on the Star Lord mini that pretty much brought the Guardians together, and then was it Andy Lanning and Dan Abnett and with my artwork we took the Guardians further, but obviously that was the foundation for what became the movies.
And again, it was kind of the glue at the time. And I had an interview during a MegaCon with Joe Quesada, and he didn't care for space stuff. It wasn't his thing. But again, it was the exact same thing as Mark Alessi. Guardians at the time was the glue of the Marvel universe because there was every part of the Marvel universe that was connected to the Guardians of the Galaxy at that point. the X-Men were connected to it, the Inhumans were connected to it,
Right.
all the space
Like,
stuff, Silver Surfer, Warlock, all these things were connecting to that.
yeah, because I mean that at that time it was Abnett and Lanning. Marvel cosmic stuff was hitting on all cylinders. So yeah, because I had started on a couple issues of Nova, and then they brought me over to Guardians of the Galaxy, and then they brought me over to the War of Kings stuff. So I was working with them a lot for a couple years, and yeah, they were just kicking ass with the stuff they were writing.
And your style and the way that you approach negation from CrossGen, it definitely lent itself to the Guardians of the Galaxy. I
Yep.
don't know if you had did any negation or CrossGen stuff prior. Would the work still be the same as it was after you got that work?
Yeah,
Or
that I don't know. They probably not, because yeah, I'd never really thought about it, but yeah, negation was a perfect training ground for a lot of that Guardian stuff.
So then, after the Guardians, you were there for doing a few things here and there for Marvel and stuff. But then you went on to another revolutionary relaunch at DC Comics, and that was Rebirth. And you got to work on Cyborg and Aquaman and Green Lantern and all these books. And
Well,
my,
yeah, I think the Aquaman stuff was still New 52. And then I ended up on Cyborg with the Rebirth stuff. Yep.
and
Yep.
Aquaman is I'm one of the very probably few, maybe not now. There's a lot of people that claim they're fans of Aquaman. I have a room that's dedicated to Aquaman merchandise, so I'm a true Aquaman fan, going back to the Super Friends and stuff like that when I was a child.
The funny thing was is I mean, I was leaving Marvel, um, and I was sniffing around at DC to see what they had available.
This is beautiful, by the way.
Yeah, that's probably the best cover I produced, on my run. But Jeff Johns had called me on the phone and asked if I was interested in possibly coming on Aquaman, because Ivan, was it Rice or Rias or however you pronounce his name, he was
I
leaving.
pronounce it Reese, but
Okay, but he was leaving the book, and I was like, well, Aquaman. And I said, I don't know, Aquaman. So Jeff said, "Well, why don't you get the trade for the first bunch of issues from the New 52, and then we'll talk at the end of the week." So I bought the trade, read through it, and when I talked to him, I said, "Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, this is what Jeff did with Aquaman was so cool, and they made him into a legit cool character." So yeah, but just the idea of, like I was saying earlier, following Chris Mooneyham on GI Joe, well, following Ivan on Aquaman was daunting. It was like, oh my god, because for me, Ivan's like one of the best artists in comics right now, and
he's a modern legend, and yeah, I agree with you. He's probably one of my all-time favorite modern artists.
when you think about like earlier DC, like Jose Garcia Lopez is probably the look of DC.
Yeah,
Whereas I think from 2000 on, Ivan became the look of DC. I
yeah.
mean, his work is just phenomenal. Even the stuff he's doing now with Ghost Machine is just beautiful, beautiful work. So yeah. So I mean, Jeff Johns has a tendency to do that with me. He has me follow incredible artists. I'm doing the fill-ins right now on Geiger for Ghost Machine. I'm like, oh, Gary Frank, come on, man. It's like
But that's the
I
thing,
gotta
though.
follow him. It's like, geez.
But that's the thing, though. You do that. You followed all these people on these titles and these launches and stuff like that. And I'm like, they're gonna put Paul Pelletier after Ivan Rice. The fans are gonna lambaste him, the poor guy. I knew your work. I knew the quality of your work. I said he's gonna do a great job, but I don't think the fans are gonna support this. But you did it for 25 issues.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I've had a few people say I didn't even notice there was a difference when you. It's like,
Oh, there's a
like,
difference.
Okay, I mean, that's the ultimate compliment. Yeah, I mean, I know a little different,
Yeah.
but still.
Um,
Well, and like I said, following Gary Frank, doing fill-in issues on Geiger. I mean, the reviews have been nice, so far, but it's like, man, Gary's such a phenomenal artist, and that actually kind of goes back to the earliest part of my career. Uh, when Gary was drawing the Hulk at Marvel, I was doing backups in his issues with the Pantheon characters. So it's kind of funny. 30 years later, I'm backing up Gary Frank still. So it's like that's kind of cool.
so that you're right. That was part of the New 52, but that was a huge relaunch at the time.
Yep.
And then Rebirth was another huge relaunch. It seems like every 7 years DC does a relaunch of their books. It seems like, but this is one that really caught my eye because I am not a huge Cyborg fan. But when I knew you were going to be on this book, and I knew that um, Semper Jr., I guess is the writer,
Mm-hmm.
and did it, and it is just absolutely beautiful. I've got to say, at and I have probably 95% of your work. I think this is the peak of your work at this point of your career, right, is Cyborg,
Thank you.
because there's so much detail, there's so much technology. I've never really seen you do technology like that before. Yeah, you've done ships and you've done space stuff, but nothing like this Cyborg. This is absolutely beautiful.
Well, I'll tell you a little secret. Initially, when the editor called me about doing it, I had turned it down
Oh gosh.
because
It seems
because
like that's your pattern. You're not sure if you should do it, and then you do it, and it's like phenomenal.
well, the ironic thing is, and it's Brian Cunningham, who now is the editor at Ghost Machine with Jeff Johns. He asked me. He said, "Well, I always wanted to see you draw like an Iron Man character." And I'm like, "Oh, I can't stand tech. It's like I have a hard time with tech." So initially, I turned it down, and then it was announced at the big comic convention in LA when they were announcing all the teams for Rebirth that I was going to be on Cyborg. So people were contacting me saying, "Congratulations, you're on Cyborg." And I said, "I had turned it down." So they came back to me and they said, "Well, what are we going to do?" I said, "Okay, I'll do it. Since it's been announced and I'm on the book, I'll do it." So
So
it
you
was,
fell into it by accident.
yep, it was kind of weird how it worked out, but it ended up being a lot more fun than I thought it would be. Even though, like I said, tech heavy stuff, I don't feel it's one of my strengths. But again, I guess that kind of situation can always be a learning experience. I learned something new, pushed my abilities to where I normally probably wouldn't go too much. So hopefully I became a better artist afterwards because of it.
And that's the moral of this whole thing that I'm trying to get through to, uh, is that each of these projects, each of these different learning experiences over your 33 years of working in this industry has made you who you are today, and that's what we all are. We learn from our past, and we add that up, and it becomes who we are today, and stuff like that. So you've been doing fill-in things and little things like this, backup stories, which are
Mm-hmm.
really fun stories. This one was a Martian Manhunter Clayface story, but you've done
Right.
a lot of those little things over the last few years, and I love those. These spring specials, winter specials, Valentine specials, all these weird anthologies. DC's doing so many anthologies nowadays. It really harkens back to the '70s with a lot of their anthology series
Yeah,
that I love.
I just did a Dead Man story for their Christmas anthology coming out.
Oh,
So
cool.
yep.
So that brings us to what we're here for, and that's
Done. Done.
G.I. Joe.
Yep.
So, were you a fan of G.I. Joe when you were a child?
I was not. I mean, I watched the cartoon every once in a while, but I wouldn't say I was like a hardcore GI Joe fan. Um, So when Alex contacted me about doing the book, it's like, oh, again, it's a lot of hardware, it's a lot of like weapons and that kind of stuff. It's like, and then after seeing what Chris was doing on the book, it's like, oh my god, it's I gotta, because Chris reminds me a lot of like a Joe Kubert type artist, and it's like, oh, it's like I I I kind of look at myself as being more of a superhero type artist. So again, it's pushing me into an area I'm not normally comfortable with. But at that time too, I had been working with gaming companies. I did a graphic novel for CMON Games, Come On Games. Um, I don't know when it will come out, but it's been 2 years since I've done it. Then I was doing a book for a video game company, so I didn't have anything on the comic book shelves in a long time. So when Alex approached me about doing GI Joe, it's like, oh, okay, it's Image, gets me back on the shelves again, gets my name out there. So it it came at a good time. Good old Zartan. But like I said, I wasn't a huge fan. But the cool thing was is when I started turning in pages, uh, the creative consultant they work with, Diana Davis, she's like the queen of GI Joe, pretty much. She emailed me and she goes, "Wow, you must have been a big fan of GI Joe growing up." It's like, it's like, well, I must be doing my job well then if she says that. So, because I was joking with her, I said, "Nope, not really. I'm trying to be a professional artist and do the best I can with it."
And that's the moral of this, is that you are a professional artist and you
Mhm.
learn and you improve with every single project. I think they were very smart to get you a dedicated person that keeps their deadlines, that knows the industry inside and out, and knows what they have to do to keep a project on schedule and things like that. Um, Diana Davis is a really cool, wonderful person. I've done a couple interviews with her
Mhm.
over the last few years myself. She's big into the GI Joe community, and she contacted me. No, I contacted her about communicating with you, and she helped me.
Right.
Uh, and so I'm not sure if you're aware of that or not.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny looking at the all the stuff in your background. It's like it reminds me of all the PDFs and reference files that Diana would send me. It was all the toys and the figures and stuff to for reference to try and keep as consistent as possible with the GI Joe universe.
Well, that's the tricky thing is, and Larry Hama, who's the writer on the book, obviously. I'm not sure if you've ever met Larry in person over the years or not at
I
conventions.
finally met him for the first time at Heroes Con this past June.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
He says it's hard, and that was his thing back in the 80s when he was doing the series. It's like, I can't write all these characters every single month. It's impossible to do that. So he kind of pared it down to a certain group of characters, and then he would throw in a character here or there, and then he'd have a special issue for the next batch of toys or whatever, and they would
Right.
do that and stuff. So he's been able to figure out a formula to do this work over the decades, because now your issue 310 is actually the second time that he has done that 155 run. So he initially did that, it ended in 94, and
Mhm.
then he started in the 2000s again. And your issue 310 is now 300 or 155 issues later
Yeah.
for GI Joe again, which is astonishing when you think about it, that he's done that twice.
Yep. Yeah, he's a machine. I mean, even when I came on the book, I think all the scripts were pretty much already written. And it's like, wow. It's like Larry's on top of it. He just well, I mean, who else is going to know the characters as well as Larry? So, I
There's
mean,
not a
what,
lot of people.
40 years writing the book pretty much. So it's like,
Yeah.
whew,
Right.
that's
So
crazy.
the fun thing is, this all these characters, they have to give you all this reference and stuff like that. Larry, he's said this in interviews going back decades. that he always has to feed these artists the reference material on guns, on pouches, on different approaches that the characters would do and stuff like that. And he said that they would always like take the books that he would send them, and so he stopped sending them books, and now he just sends them like emails with pictures and things like that. What was your working relationship with him for these 5 issues?
It was not as much with Larry sending me reference as Diana. Diana was the one who sent most of the reference. Though I mean, there were times when, uh, if there were specific kind of guns that Larry had in mind, he would include the reference with the script. But as far as like just most of the character work, and it was Diana that sent me most of the ref.
Wow.
Yeah. So, like I said, I think when I came on the book, Larry had already written like, if not all of them, at least 3 or 4 of them had already been written when I first came on. So I think he was already beyond my issues. Um, so yeah, so it was Diana was the one who I dealt with the most as far as reference materials. And I went to my local comic shop and I went through their back issue bin. I bought a whole bunch of GI Joes from back in the day. So
Well, that's really awesome. I love who I don't know who they have as a colorist on this new GI Joe since
mhm.
issue 301, but the coloring is absolutely stellar.
I like how he combines kind of a new feel, but with he'll add like a dot matrix, so it looks like the old newsprint, comics too. Yeah, he
Yep,
does a wonderful job. Francesco, yeah, he does amazing stuff. His old Destro.
absolutely beautiful. They ended your run on a cliffhanger, but
Yeah.
we know there's going to be another issue, and the other artist is coming back for another arc.
Yep.
But then, uh, can we spoil or announce that you are going to be coming back to GI Joe for another arc?
Well, I mean, the editor reached out to me about coming back with I believe it's issue 316. Um, and I got to wrap up my duties on Geiger. My first issue just came out a couple weeks back, and then I'm almost done the second issue now, and then I got a third issue. But yeah, I think there's a really good chance I'll be coming back to the GI Joe for a few issues. So see what kind of crazy stuff Larry will have have me draw in those issues.
Well, that's the thing. You're drawing a war, and it seems like everything you do, there's some sort of a war at the center of it. With the cross gen stuff, the negation, that was like in a war. The Guardians of the Galaxy, they were always in a
Uh,
war.
the
You know,
War of Kings. The War of Kings was nuts because you had the Shire Empire, you had the Inhumans, you had the Guardians, you had X-Men characters. It was like, oh my god, it was like there was a lot of stuff going on in those issues.
and your GI Joe issues, you have zombies, you have techno organic robots, you got the Joes, ninjas, you got all these key characters that have to look like their key characters, like Cobra Commander in his armor. That hasn't
Mhm.
been used in decades, since like the late 80s, like 89 or whatever was the last time that armor was used. So did you have to go find the
Right.
issues that armor was in?
I lucked out that I actually did have the ones I bought. Actually, a couple of them included that armor, so that I lucked out with that because Diana had sent me like the toy box art from the original, when they originally did the armor. But I did have those issues of GI Joe that had that armor. So yeah, it's a unique looking uh, outfit, pretty much. But I think there's someone that works on the staff with Diana and Alex and those guys that's a huge fan of that armor. So when I started turning in pages, they were all like saying, as long as he likes it, you're in good shape. And I guess I guess everybody liked what I was doing, so it's like
It's
cool.
my it's one of my favorite versions of Cobra Commander. I really thought it was unique in the approach to it, where they made him. Spoilers for anybody that doesn't know this, it was Fred Seven that was in the Cobra Commander armor back in the day. I'm not going to spoil who's in the armor right now because you might be wanting to read the new issues, so I'm not going to spoil that. But there's somebody else in the armor now.
Yeah.
Um, so obviously you've done all kinds of different types of comics over the decades. We've gone through a lot of that. What genre do you find the most challenging now, and what do you uh, want to draw? What genres and types of things do you like to draw, and would like to do more in?
Well, as far as challenging stuff, I mean, the GI Joe was up there. Just vehicles and guns and like armor and all that kind of stuff. That always is a big challenge for me. So that I would say that's probably up there as far as like challenging for me. What I'd like to draw, that's a good question because most of the time in my career, I don't get to pick and choose what I draw. It's basically whatever comes across my table. Um, Someday it would be fun to do something that is a little more. I don't want to say like fantasy based, but more less real world. Something connected to the real world. I'd rather do something where I can, kind of like negation, where we just could do whatever we wanted. It was just different worlds, different just things I could create versus having to use reference for. So something like that would be something a little more organic and less techy. But I don't know. I think a lot of it depends on who I'm working with as a writer, because that goes a long ways to whether or not a project is enjoyable or if it's more like pulling teeth. So, but I prefer, like, one of the writers I really enjoyed working with when I was at Marvel was Dan Slott. I loved doing She-Hulk and the Great Lakes Avengers stuff. His sense of humor really kind of locks in with my sense of humor. So that's the kind of goofy little, left of center weird humor. That kind of stuff I really enjoy. So, every time I look at a comic book like Eric Powell's The Goon, that kind of stuff, it just cracks me up. That's kind of where my sense of humor lies. So if I could do something like that in the future in a comic, that would be a lot of fun.
Dan Slott is a wonderful writer, and he can write anything. And he's
Yep.
done some really good work on She-Hulk and Spider-Man and stuff over the
Yep.
years, and Silver Surfer and stuff. But you may want to look at Boom Studios. They are doing a lot of that fun type comics right now. It seems like every 20 years is an 80s boom or whatever you want to call it. But I call this the Disney boom right now because they're doing like all that old Disney cartoon stuff from the afternoon hour
Okay.
Disney at no, it's not Boom. It's Dynamite. What am I saying? Dynamite
Oh,
Studios,
okay.
not Boom, but they're doing a lot of that type of stuff. Uncle Scrooge, DuckTales, all that Disney type adventure stuff. Thundercats, Silverhawks.
I gotta get in contact with the Dynamite guys because Ron Mars and I actually did a John Carter one shot. That yeah, I finished drawing that last October,
Wow.
November, something like that. And yeah, so I mean, they were supposed to shoot it directly from my pencils and then color directly from the pencils. But yeah, we have it's I think it's a 32 page one shot that will it ever see print? I don't know, but I'm hoping.
There's a lot of projects like that that are out there that never see the light of day, and it's very sad. GI Joe is one of those weird series that they had what you call uh, fill-in issues or backup issues or
Right.
whatever you want to call that issue. And at the end, they took all those and stuck them in GI Joe by the end of it. I think that's why we ended up with 155 issues of GI Joe instead of 150 or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and sometimes those issues are really interesting issues.
Yeah, I mean that's. I mean, I remember growing up when I was reading a lot of Marvel comics at that time. Uh, they would always have like one issue a year where it was like completely different from everything, like typical superhero stuff. It would be
Yep.
like Beast and Wonder Man hanging out at a bar, or Thing having his poker game or something like that. And then it was
Yeah.
kind of weird because in like the early 2000s, it almost seemed like those became most of the issues that they were printing, and then every once in a while there will be an action issue. So it's kind of weird how things kind of flip flop like that. But hey,
Well, you just never know when it comes to the comic industry. And so, what what is happening in the industry that excites you at the moment? Because obviously, Skybound has reinvigorated. It seems like every time there's a relaunch of GI Joe, and you can go back and you can look at the empirical evidence of this, that GI Joe invigorates the industry. It did it with Larry Hama's original in the 80s.
mm-hmm,
GI Joe was almost outselling every major title, Superman, Batman, you name it, Spider-Man. At the time, it's considered one of the highest rated series of the time, top 10 titles. And
mm-hmm,
then when Devil's Due brought it back, the 80s boom again 20 years ago, 25 years ago, G.I. Joe reinvigorated comics again. And that's when you get like Ultimate Universe, you get all this new cool Grant Morrison X-Men, all these neat things going on at DC, relaunching Crisis, all these cool characters coming back. And now it's again with Skybound, they're reinvigorating the industry of people going into the comic stores, they're going to buy comics. There's there's like 52 variant covers of issue 1 of GI Joe next month. That Joshua Williams. That is just astonishing that they can do that. Void Rivals #1 is on its like 10th printing.
well, it's not that much different. It's kind of like the Turtles thing. It's almost like an 80s toy thing where the Turtles, like every 10 years it seems like they resurge, and there's a whole bunch new interest and people go and buy the books. Yeah, I think there's kind of a tie-in between, yeah, I think that nostalgia for the 80s cartoons and the toys, and it just seems to keep coming back over and over again. And ironically, when I was working on the GI Joe, when I first started working on this GI Joe, the 5 issues, I was on the side. I was working on an exclusive for San Diego Comic Con. It was for the game company Cool Minis or Not. They do all the Zombicide games, and they had a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles tie-in with Zombicide, and I did a 25-page San Diego exclusive comic for them at the same time. So I was working on Turtles and GI Joe at the same time. So it was kind of wacky. Heck, they could have thrown Thundercats and Transformers at me, and then I would have been in toy heaven pretty much.
Well, just stick with Skybound. You could do Transformers probably very easily.
Eh, yeah, talk about a challenge. That would be real tough to draw. I think that would probably be even more difficult than for me than GI Joe, and GI Joe's a challenge. So
Well, yeah, Larry said it's hard. It's hard to try and do all those characters and get them correct and stuff like that. And you spoke about it earlier and stuff like that. A lot of artists over the decades have had that same challenge. That's why they don't stay on GI Joe that long. Like your Ron Wiggums, your Ron Wagners, your Wee Leaks, your MD Brights. They typically only stuck around for about 20 or 30 issues, and there was people filling in during those runs if you look at the old GI Joe series.
20 or
Uh,
30 issues. So that's a pretty good run. So that's
yeah,
not bad at all.
no. Um, So where do you see yourself in this industry coming in the future? You've been in it 33 years. Larry says he's going to just die over his board drawing, and Herb Trimpe has said that. Is, is that what you want, or what do you see yourself doing?
Eventually, it would be nice to get to a point where, I was working on something that I had a little more control over, like a creator owned type thing. But I mean, I'm terrible. I'm not good at coming up with an initial idea for a book. But if I was working with a writer and expanding on something, I think I could see myself doing that. Um, so I mean, ultimately, that would be the goal. Something that I had a little more creative control over, something that yeah, that I mean, it would probably ultimately be more fun for me to draw if I was in a little more control of it creatively. But hey, I'm not going to complain if I'm just consistently getting work from different companies, getting to work with different writers and creative people. I mean, it's not a bad thing at all. You know? So
You're in a
so
good
as long
position.
as I'm still working.
Yeah, you're in a great position. I would have to say you can pick and choose what you want to do, and you can turn down things you don't want to do. Not a lot of people have those options available to them, um, and so I think that's wonderful. Um,
Well, by the way, you mentioned that Cyborg was one of your favorite things I had worked on. Did you notice it was Tony Cordos inking me on Cyborg, and that's who was inking me on the GI Joe stuff. So,
no, I didn't notice that. I'm sorry, I
yep,
didn't look that closely, but oh, that's great.
yep.
Um, Do you said you went to Heroes Con? What was your reception? Were the GI Joe fans there? Do they talk to you about GI Joe at all?
A few. I mean, I had more of it. It's like I'm trying to remember if the issue had come out. I think the first issue had come out by that Heroes Con, but I had a few GI Joe fans talk to me, and I did a show in Kentucky a couple months earlier than that, and I had done at that show. I had even more GI Joe fans that were excited to see I was on the book, and so that was really cool. It was nice to see that dedication to the book.
Oh yeah, the fans of GI Joe, the community of GI Joe is absolutely huge. It's a global
Hmm.
fandom, and there's different approaches to GI Joe from different countries and different versions of GI Joe and all over the globe and stuff like that. So it is a huge, huge fan base, and a lot of people don't get it. But obviously, you have, and you seem pretty enthusiastic. You're going to come back. So I think that's wonderful. Have you ever thought of going to like Joe Fest, the dedicated GI Joe convention at all?
Hmm. If I'm sure if there was an invite, if someone would invite me to it, I'd seriously think about it. Especially if I get another 5 issues under my belt, get a good 10 issues of GI Joe. That would be something definitely to think about.
Next year's Joe Fest has Larry Hama there,
Okay,
so it might be something to think about. Your contact that I have, is that a contact that can be passed on to the showrunners of Joe Fest?
sure. Yep,
Oh, right. That'd be great. The GI Joe community comes together when they do these shows. Assembly Required, Joe Lanta, SoCal Joe Show, the Kentuckiana Joe Show, and Joe Fest is the new Joe Con. And I think you would have a really good time hanging out with all the guys there. There's a lot of creators, people that have worked on the GI Joe brand that go to Joe Fest over
right.
the decades. So I think it'd be interesting for you to talk to some of those people and get to rub elbows with some of those guys.
Yeah, teach me, tell me what I'm doing wrong, or
Uh,
hopefully not that much, but
No, I don't think you're doing anything wrong. The work is beautiful. When I heard the announcement, I was like, oh, they couldn't ask for a better person to do this because he's so dedicated. And like you said, you're a guy that does his deadlines and does his work, or you wouldn't be in the industry as long as you have. There's a lot of people that have petered out that aren't in the industry anymore. But you're like you said, you're that regular steady guy that's going to do the work and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think the only regret I had with the last issue or two of GI Joe was at that time I was working on three different things at once. I was doing a GI Joe. I started working on Geiger, and I had I think it was a 10-page Green Lantern stuff I was doing for the 0 Hour anniversary special for DC.
Oh,
So,
that's right.
so doing the three things at once, it's like, oh. So that's always difficult because it's like, well, I don't want to screw things up here, and like three completely different kind of books. So but again, I guess what doesn't kill me hopefully makes me stronger. So
That's true. I forgot to bring that zero. I just read it like last week. But you've got a second hand at Green Lantern. You've done it 3 times now, and it seems like you're old hat at that character. That seems like one of your go-to characters that you've done over the decades.
well, that is one of the that is the Kyle Rayner Green Lantern. That is one of the characters that if people bring up books from the 90s for me to sign at a convention, it's usually Green Lantern stuff. There are a lot of fans of that particular version of Green Lantern, the Kyle Rayner version. So yeah, I mean, it was very cool working with Ron Mars on that stuff, and that's why it was great doing the John Carter story with him again. So I think it was the first time I'd worked with him since probably the Green Lantern stuff back in the 90s.
You didn't get to work with him at CrossGen at all?
Nope.
Oh,
No.
that stinks.
No, and I always give him a hard time because I don't think he was the one that recommended me at CrossGen. I think it was Mark Wade. And I'm like, Ron, what's wrong with you? But hey, either way, it was cool sharing studio space with them, both of them.
Well, I think you've done a wonderful job on GI Joe. The fan community, the positivity that I've seen so far has been very good. I look forward to seeing what you can do in the future when you're not on 3 books at the same time.
Uh-huh.
Uh, Larry's always trying to do crazy stuff, so you never know what he's going to pull out of his hat with these characters. Now that he doesn't have to put out a line of toys every year in the comic, he can do whatever the heck he wants.
Yeah. Well, I'll keep my fingers crossed. I wouldn't mind having more stories with Destro and the Baroness. I didn't really get to draw those characters too much in the first 5 issues I did. So I'll keep my fingers crossed that maybe in the next 5 there'll be more of those characters.
Maybe they can get you on the regular GI Joe series with Joshua Williamson, who's doing stellar work at DC Comics at the moment, but is also a huge Joe guy. And I'm guessing Tom Riley is not going to be able to do GI Joe indefinitely without a break.
It's always a possibility, but there is something to be said for working with Larry too. So,
well, yeah, of course.
yeah.
But they've been doing these mini series like they did the Duke, Cobra
Right.
Commander, Destro, Scarlet. Maybe they can do another Destro or Baroness miniseries, and they could get you to do that. If they are watching this, which I doubt they're watching this, but you never know. I'll share it to as many places that I can. Maybe they'll see it.
Diana might be watching,
Oh,
so.
yeah, she is going to watch. You're right. So I think it's been awesome. You taking the time out of your obviously busy schedule to speak to me. Is there any last things that you would like to say to the fans or the fan base, the GI Joe community, anyone, before I let you go?
Well, I mean, I appreciate anyone going out and picking up the books. I mean, that's why we do them, for the fans to appreciate. So anytime I get a chance to sign books at a convention, it's always so great to see people actually buying the books. And I mean, if they're ever interested in wanting to see I sell. I have a website that I sell artwork on. Original page work. That's paulpelletierart.com. And if anybody leaves me messages, I try to be really good at answering my emails. But no, I appreciate anyone who actually hunts down these books at a comic shop and actually buys them. Ultimate gratitude for the people who still buy the books. I mean, it's the industry is not doing quite as well as it had been in the past. So hopefully we can somehow get people back into reading comics again. So I appreciate it. I'm thankful every time I see people that pick up the books.
Well, GI Joe is selling through the roof. I think issue one, they're saying it's going to be probably about over 1 million copies going to be sold. When's the last time you heard that? When's the last time you heard a comic sell over 1 million copies? They just did the cutoff for GI Joe #1. I
Well,
think what.
I remember just hearing people talking about the Kickstarter for the compendia.
Oh
The,
God.
the collections is like, holy cow, that's incredible that they raised that much money to put those together. So it's great to see that there's still interest.
Well, the GI Joe fandom supports itself, and we want our community to get as big as possible. We want people to know about GI Joe. We want it to be obviously have quality work done about it. Like the movies are a bit questionable, but the comics are stellar. The comics are brilliant, and the toys and all the stuff that's happening right now for GI Joe is like the best it's been in the last probably 15 years. It's cyclical, like you were saying, and so I think you're a welcome addition to this community, and I really appreciate you coming and speaking to me. I love the work you've done on GI Joe. I've loved your whole career, obviously. I probably have everything you've done, most of it. I'd say 95% at least. And I look forward to all your future endeavors, and hopefully we get to meet sometime in the future, maybe at Joe Fest. You never know. Uh, so thank you, Paul.
Yeah, that would be very cool. But I appreciate you inviting me on and getting a chance to talk. It's been a treat. So thank you very much.
Hopefully I wasn't too difficult with some of my questions.
No, not at all.
Sometimes going down memory lane is difficult for people, but I try to make it.
No, I mean, I always look at the stuff I did in the past as, that's where I wouldn't be where I am now if it wasn't for the stuff I did before. So, there's no pain looking back at that stuff.
So, patrons out there, if you would like to see more content and really cool interviews with wonderful artists like Paul Pelletier, like, subscribe, share this video, and we will see you next time. And I like to say, Yo, Joe.
Yo, Joe.